Welcome to another episode of the Pennock Knockdown, a podcast where we unpack key strategies and tactics for digital marketing leaders. I've got a really awesome guest with us today. We're with Leslie McIntosh. She is a marketing executive and business leader with over 20 years experience driving growth for iconic global brands, including L'Oréal, Procter & Gamble, Revlon, and Philips. Today, through her consultancy, Brand Botany, she works as a fractional CMO and strategic advisor to high potential consumer facing brands in the beauty industry, wellness, home, CPG, and she's really helping them scale and grow their objectives through stronger positioning, focused priorities, and cohesive execution. Leslie, so excited to have you on the show. Your background is so perfectly fit for what we like to do with the people we work with here at our agency.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm really excited to be here. As I said before, this is my first podcast interview, so bear with me, but I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yay. Well, we're so excited you chose the Knockdown to break yourself into the podcast lane. Well, tell us a little bit about what you were doing. So I hear you were with a handful of different brands, but tell me the roles you had with some of these brands before you started Brand Botany.
Sure. So my background, as you said, as just listed, is primarily in enterprise CPG. So I like to say that I am classically modern. So a classically trained consumer products brand marketer coming up through some of the fundamentals, the brand building fundamentals and the training that you get when you work for these companies. So coming up also starting from being an assistant brand manager all the way to vice president. So in my most recent enterprise role, I was vice president of marketing at Revlon, overseeing our color cosmetics, our hair color, and our beauty tools categories. All of those experiences were great in just terms of just giving me that foundational marketing experience. But even somewhere around the way, I actually spent 5 years as a founder myself. So I actually started my own e-commerce business. It was called Louis Beauty and Wellness. And I bring that up because I have, yes, this big company experience, but I know that you also talk to emerging brands. And this was Louis Beauty was my opportunity to tap into the beauty space from an emerging perspective. I curated about 30 beauty and wellness brands across skincare, cosmetics, hair color, home, etc. And it was scrappy, it was hands-on, but it was one of the most rewarding chapters of my career. It really complemented what I learned from an enterprise perspective, and it actually led me to what I'm doing today. I really enjoyed working with my partners at these different brands, but I also saw an opportunity to be able to tap into my experience to be able to help take these brands to the next level. And so that's kind of the gist of what I've done, leveraging that big company experience as well as my own experience as a founder and being able to use those experiences to help the brands that I work with through Brand Botany.
I really like that. So yeah, that clarifies the big corporate background paired with, well, you've done it now yourself. So you kind of know how to fill in all of the gaps that a founder or an executive team at a big or small company is thinking through. So that's a really unique position to be in. When you go about the Brand Botany stuff, how many brands do you usually have the bandwidth to help at any given time? I know fractional work can be very different in terms of size and scope, client by client.
So I would say I've been at this for about 1.5 years and I'm still figuring it out. I would say, and so I've just recently kind of updated my services so that there's my official fractional CMO work, but then there's advisory work. So what I would say from an official fractional CMO, I would say 2 to 3 clients at most for that, just because that is more embedded role, hands-on. It's really intensely about the business. But then when it comes from, and that all depends on how many hours I'm giving to any given brand. But then I also have opportunities where I can work with brands just on an advisory basis where maybe I'm meeting with them a couple of times a month. We're walking through some of their strategies and things like that. I'm providing guidance and feedback versus being very hands-on in terms of developing their strategies. And so with that gives me a lot of flexibility. But from a pure fractional standpoint, I would say 2, maybe no more than 3 clients at a time.
Got it. Yeah, that feels about average for what we've heard too. So that makes a ton of sense to kind of position yourself for a bandwidth about that. So when you look at some of the marketing strategies that you've seen, some of the emerging brands, either ones you've worked with or ones you've just observed, what are you finding are strategies that are really taking hold right now and making more of an impact? And it could be this moment in time, back half of 2025, or just kind of like a more macro, moment where you're seeing campaigns and channels perhaps perform better than expected?
I would say brands that are taking a step back from just being, and this is kind of what I've observed as well as what I practice, but I would say brands that are taking a step back from just trying to like have just multiple tactics that are separate and distinct from each other, but they're not working together, to being more focused. And maybe sometimes it's fewer, bigger, better. So maybe you say, hey, listen, because I've worked with brands where they may have like some kind of activation every month. And that is difficult. That's difficult to manage executionally. So what I've seen working and with my own experience as an enterprise marketer, as well as with the brands that I advise today, is when you look at the calendar and you plan it out and you say, hey, listen, we have maybe 4 to 6 key activation moments, and then we ladder all of our tactics around that. And so this way you get more impact versus just having these different things that operate separately. And then you're also recognizing that consumers aren't necessarily coming to your brand in one way. They may see you on social, they may see you on Instagram, they may see you on TikTok, but they also may see you out of home, right? So there's different ways. And so I think when you kind of have that principal campaign idea and you surround it with tactics, it's just more high impact. And then also, if you're in retail, it helps with a retailer perspective because they get excited when you have campaigns that can ladder back to also driving that traffic in store. So those are kind of, I like to do fewer, bigger, better, especially work with emerging brands that may feel overwhelmed with execution and they may have limited resources. So it's like, okay, let's focus those limited resources. And when I say limited resources, I'm not just talking about the dollars, but the people, because in today's environment of digital marketing, everything is like, you have to really plan. There's so many execution moments. And so just kind of being really focused on those moments holistically is a good way to go.
I love that. And kind of speaking a language we like to preach here too, which is you have to have those activation moments, 4 to 6, 7, 8 possible. Doesn't usually hurt. But I guess that's what I wanted to get into for a second is what happens? What's plan B if one of these activations is just not meeting expectations?
That's a good question because you should have a plan B. And that's actually the beauty about the digital landscape is that if I go back like 15 years ago when I was at L'Oréal, for instance, we would have a launch and it was kind of like it was a formula. You had displays in store, you had a TV campaign, and you ran that TV campaign for about 6 months. And it was planned in advance. The media was bought in advance. So you ran it pretty much. And you would optimize it if it didn't work, right? But today, of course, we have a lot more flexibility. So I would say first is you should always be monitoring everything on a regular basis so that you can know where to optimize and see where the out is. But at the same time, there's always going to be some kind of fundamental, you should have some level of always on for your brand, whether that's having your email list activated. So when I say kind of like these focus tent poles, it's not just, hey, you abandon some of the basic underlying marketing. You still want to have like that engagement and those other initiatives. But I would say in that event that particular tent pole isn't working to your advantage, I would then look at what are some things that you know have worked well and just kind of fall back on those different playbooks. So if it's leveraging consumer testimonials and your advertising and things like that, maybe hit that up, find a new way to speak about it. If there's a product in your portfolio that you know always resonates when you go, I always say go on air, but when you go live with it, play that up until you can get back to the point where you can recover and move on to that next exciting moment. But what I will say is that we live in a better time today because we have that opportunity to take a step back and optimize versus having to say, hey, listen, we already spent the money on that media. We have to move forward with it.
I love that. Yeah. And that's precisely kind of what we're seeing too is there are a few activations that don't hit expectation. And as long as business as usual and kind of like evergreen programmings can pick up and carry the weight of the miss of the activation moment, we can fill in the gaps. But I think it's always discouraging for brands to not hit expectations out of the gate, especially if the activation is like a new product launch or something like that.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Sometimes it's like I've worked on launches in the past where you have a product that maybe didn't hit the first time around and you had to rethink it and it hit the second time around. So I remember launching years ago, we had a tinted moisturizer and we repositioned it as a BB cream, right? So, and it really made an impact. So sometimes it's a small tweak. sometimes it's a bigger tweak and it may take another shot at it. But yeah, I mean, the reality is in this environment, because there's so much competition, because there's just so many messages out there, everything is test and learn. 100% of your strategy is test and learn, but you just take that
Yeah.
as a new opportunity to continue to grow and learn as a brand.
Yeah, and I like that positioning of a tinted moisturizer to like a cream, because it's like sometimes you have to repackage, so to speak, the marketing experience of it to make it land. And rather than abandoning ship and being like, this is not the right product for the brand, there can be a different path to success. So that's a really good example. I know we wanted to get into maybe some examples of marketing that worked or maybe didn't work in reference to either Lovey or something else. But yeah, do you want to tell the audience about campaign or marketing initiative that did really well or really poorly, and what the aha was from that?
Yeah, so there's been so many in my career, but what I will do is I'll share experience for my own position as a founder. So kind of like what you just asked, when I was, and this is more tactical, but when I was running my store, I had gotten to a point, I was a few months in where I hit a stride where the volumes were healthy. It wasn't huge. It wasn't a huge business, but the volumes were healthy. But I was looking to take the business up another level. I wanted to increase my email list. I wanted to increase my social following. And I also just wanted to drive sales. I had really healthy conversion, but I felt like if I can get more traffic to the site, then I could just get better sales overall. And so what I did was I was onboarding some new brands, and I thought this is a great way to show partnership with the brands that I was working with. And so I had like a month of giveaways where I was giving away new products every week. And I leveraged Meta. So I had targeted Meta ads, which was great. I leveraged one of those viral loop apps that are out there. I don't know if they're still out there, but that was, I leveraged that. And then I also placed, of course, I leveraged my email and social media, but then I also placed the giveaways onto a few of those freebie sites. And so once the campaign started, I had immediate traction. I was getting all this traffic. It was just amazing. I had gotten traffic that I had never seen before. I had gotten, of course, the email following. My email list grew. My social following grew. I was really excited about it. But the moment that campaign ended, the last giveaway that I gave away, that new audience was dead silent. They didn't respond to my email outreach. They never opened another email. They didn't really engage on social. So I had this social following that didn't respond to anything. And it was as though I had purchased like social followers. And maybe I did, I don't know. But one of my takeaways from that, which is something that I know as a marketer, is that it's very important for you to understand your audience and what motivates them. How do you reach them? And this isn't always easy, especially if you don't have that data, but put yourself in their shoes and then be able to activate on those different moments. And the other thing I'll say is that all growth or all traffic isn't great traffic, because dealt with this in other roles in my career where you may have a lot of traffic, but they don't do anything. So you want to make sure you invest in trying to get to that high quality traffic and leads. And what I will say is that the Meta part of it was strategic, but the part that, and even the viral loop app was actually probably okay to work with, but putting my program on a freebie site, that wasn't my consumer. My consumer isn't looking for freebies. They're looking for the products that I sell. And so that actually, just putting that within the marketing mix just kind of led everything astray. So it's kind of like, for me, it was falling back on the fundamentals. I should have known it going in, but I thought, hey, why not? This is what people were saying. But I knew better as a marketer. So that's a learning experience.
That's interesting. And I do think like we're at this moment in time where it feels like just picking up and copying another brand's playbook, not to say that's what you were doing, but like it really doesn't work right now. And I can't tell you how many in-house marketing teams we've worked with over the years that are like, so-and-so over there that's like 3x bigger than us is doing their programming this way. Can you just kind of like make ours look similar or follow what they've got going on? And it's like, well, one could do that, but you're not going to see the same results that they are. And two, like if your customer base is the same as their customer base and your product is not all that different, like why would someone abandon their brand for you, right? So I think we're just at this moment in time where authenticity and just knowing your audience, what they stand for, is so meaningful. And I love the last part of what you said there, which is your whole strategy of your giveaways, your weekly giveaways, et cetera, could have worked differently had you not gone to that freebie site, right?
Yes,
so like
yes.
You were so close to maybe having a slightly different outcome of that program. But I get like the situation you're in. You're like, well, I'm really going for this growth, and this is another path to growth, and I'm the owner and I want to do what I want to do. And
Yeah.
here we are.
Yep, exactly.
So I love that example. When you think about the brands you're now working with, representing either as an advisor or fractional CMO, when you start to get to know them, have those early conversations, are you hearing over the past year and a half since Brand Botany has been around, like changes in what they're looking for from a partner like you?
Typically because of how I position myself. I think that when brands reach out to me, they know that I have a significant background in CPG, that I know retail and things like that. So the brands that tend to reach out to me are the ones that are at this point where they've had some level of success and they're looking for someone that has that experience that can help them navigate retail, for instance, that's an example, or just kind of get to that, like they just know that they want to be bigger and they need someone that has that experience of being part of like being on that bigger stage, right? So I would say that that's one part of it. At the same time, sometimes brands will kind of still fall back on talking about like tactics, kind of like the current tactics and like really trying to fix that. And so what I will say in general, I feel like in the last 15 months or 18 months or so, just because of the different dynamics in the market, I think that a lot of brands are just very precious. Not to say they haven't been before, but they're very precious about their spend and their expectations. And this is for a few reasons. Obviously, we've been dealing with this inflation for the last few years. There's been so much uncertainty in the environment. Now we're dealing with the tariffs. And also because investors aren't, the cash isn't flowing as freely. So you have brands that may have started off thinking, hey, I was going to get investment at this stage, or I was going to have an exit, but now they're being asked to be more bootstrapped for longer and holding their business for longer. So as a result, they're thinking about their business differently. Things like margins and ROI are increasingly important. And then as they realize that sometimes being D2C only may be more expensive than having broader distribution from a customer acquisition standpoint, they're looking out. And so as a result, they're looking for providers, whether it's myself or if it's when I'm working with a brand and I'm looking for providers that have some sensitivity to those pressures that the internal marketing team or the internal team is facing, so that they can answer the call of how do we get to ROI? How do we get to incrementality? How do we make every spend, every dollar matter? And so those are kind of, I think those are some of the pain points or some of the tensions that a lot of internal teams or founders are dealing with today. And it's also like whether I'm talking to founders today or with the teams that I work with, it's also in conversations that I've had in different events and conferences that I've attended. It's just like ROI. Of course, you're talking about the difference of being a D2C only brand, transitioning to retail, trying to get to that productivity and succeeding at that retailer is also very key. So just having that knowledge and that insight is very important. So it's building that reach and that awareness is key. I would never downplay that. But having that tied into some level of ROI for the brand is very important.
We're definitely seeing that too. So it's like, show me a model that indicates working with you is a path to a different future than where we are today. And like, let me buy into your model because, yeah, we can throw all the words out there and come up with a really good strategy. But until we can kind of like project what that actually means for the business, it's so hard for everyone to like get circulated on the same thing. So for us, we found like our modeling mix is really where we get that easy buy-in with brands. And it's interesting. I was a minute late for this conversation today because I was talking to another fractional we work with, and we just pitched to one of her brands last week. And she was like, well, the client doesn't think your model is aggressive enough for what the future will look like. And it's like, this is a discovery conversation. And I'd love to say we can do things that look so different than what you're doing today, but like, I don't want to set you up for disappointment. And I don't know some of these variables about the business. So it's sort of that it's relational and it's going to be different for every client, how they're going to respond to a model. But for us, having a fake model that just has no truth to it is super, super concerning. So with you all the way. And I think like the accuracy of what you're putting out there does matter a lot in terms of projecting the future.
What I will say about that, so in addition to kind of like the work that I do through Brand Botany, I participate in different accelerators and mentor different brand founders. And a lot of them grew up in the playbook of, meta ads. And it's not to say that meta ads don't work. I think they're still a key part of most brands' marketing mix. But a lot of them are frustrated that that's kind of like everything, all their eggs are in one basket. And so, but at the same time, there's a lot of fear about trying new things. And the thing is, the reality is, Nothing is guaranteed the same for every brand. I think you touched upon this earlier, but you do have to reserve a little bit of your budget, at least every year, to try to try new things so that you can expand how you reach consumers. Because Meta only, I think it came from a solutions provider, but they told me that, hey, listen, some of these walled gardens, they only account for about 40% of the internet opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, but it does require, a little risk taking. But if you know your consumer well, ideally it would work well for you. But yeah, there's no guarantees. It's just about taking another step.
Speaking of like the risk taking and where you're kind of maybe looking at the future in terms of efficient channels outside of like the Meta and the Googles and the obvious players, what are you excited to kind of keep an eye on or have brands start to test a little bit more heavily?
I get excited about, and some of these might kind of sound like, hey, these are not like necessarily new to world, but for some of the brands that I've worked with that have been mostly focused on Meta, I like the idea, like when I've reached out, when I've suggested like things like CTV to brands, they're like fearful because they're like, oh, that's going to be so expensive. But the reality is that a lot of this has become more accessible in recent years. Not even just like before, you had to have like a media agency to buy TV. You had to have like a big creative agency to create the ads. But there's just a lot of solutions out here that make it easy for brands to get into living rooms and tell their story in a bigger way. So I'm excited about testing CTV. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of solutions providers over the last couple of months. I've just attended a lot of conferences. I'm also excited about performance audio. So we're on a podcast here, but the opportunities there about telling that story in a different way. Way back when, I used to work in advertising on the agency side, and my client was McDonald's. And this is like early in my career. And we did a lot of radio advertising, and it really helps to tell the story. So fast forward to today where you have like the growth of podcasts and audio streaming. I'm looking forward to testing that as a channel. Gosh, let me just think. Well, retail media obviously is a key one. I mean, that's one of those channels where it's evolving all the time, and you do have to be careful as a brand that you don't get sucked into just helping drive that retailer's revenue stream, that you're doing things that are driving the growth of the brand. But then there's also, I guess, one of the last ones I'll say is I've been curious about Reddit. I know that they've been offering advertising for a number of years, and I think I tested it before with one of the brands. It's been a while, but I feel like they've stepped up their approach to marketers in terms of like what they have to offer. And they're actually serving me CTV ads. So I've been seeing them a lot this past week, but I'm curious about Reddit because I know that when you search for a lot of things for different categories, whether it's skincare, tequila, I work at a tequila brand, there's a lot of like subreddits for a lot of these different categories. And so I'm excited about reaching those consumers in a different way. So those are just a handful. Outside of that, I think you were right earlier when you said, brands follow the same playbook. And I think you get to the point where you may have like these table stake channels, but you do need to think about how do you differentiate in terms of where your channels are, but then also like test those little niche channels. So there's other little things that come to mind. I mean, that people, present to me when I go to conferences and things like that also may be great to try. But like, I'm always like open to conversations, especially because I'm working on emerging brands. I don't necessarily have the team of agencies around me that I would have had like, working for Revlon or L'Oréal, et cetera. And I think a lot of emerging brands kind of lead the way in terms of making a lot of these platforms even attractive to bigger brands. So yeah, those are some of the key areas. There's always so many of them, but those are some of the ones that are on my mind right now as I'm thinking about planning. That said, I am working with a couple of media agencies, and I do rely on their advice and counsel as well.
It's one of the reasons you're paying them, right? So
Exactly.
that's great to have them in
Yes.
your corner. We've got two questions as we wrap. The first is around if you have any beauty product or service that you've recently discovered that you want to shout out here as a consumer.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So shout out. Okay. So this is one I haven't tried yet that just came on my radar like within the last week. So I subscribe to a lot of email lists for different beauty brands just to keep me like in tune to like what's the latest. And so I don't always open them. For some reason, I open one from the brand Nurse Jamie. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that brand, but I was immediately amazed by this product. And I guess this product has been around for some years, but I'm just now discovering I think it's called like the Sonic Uplift Roller. And it's a product that is kind of like Y-shaped, and it's actually meant for the body. But they had a gift in the email that really struck me because they used it on the face, and I was like, "Wow, this looks amazing! I have to add this to my wish list." It's a lot more expensive than my regular Jade roller, but as I get older, lifting and firming become benefits that appeal much to me. So this Nurse Jamie Uplift roller, just looks like a very attractive product. So it's something that I'm adding to my wish list for the holidays. So we'll see.
I can't wait to check it out. I'm not familiar with the Uplift Body Sonic Beauty Roller, so
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the name. I'll go check it out.
yeah.
Leslie, this has been great. I think what we love to leave the guests with at the end, or the listeners who stay till the end, is advice you would give yourself if you're starting all over again. So say you're in your early 20s, just figuring it out. What would you tell yourself?
Yeah, so I would say there's three things. The first is your voice matters. So don't be afraid to speak. Even if you're not the most senior person in the room, don't wait for permission to speak up because opinions and thoughts and ideas come from everyone. And listen, some companies are open to that, some companies are not. So, you do have to read the room, but I think that that's important. And even if you're like working with your cross-functional partners, like, making sure that you have a point of view and that it's heard. The other area I would say would be networking, learn to love networking. Which I didn't always love. For me, networking always meant, oh my God, I need a job and I got to talk to somebody about it. But I would say, as a service provider with Brand Botany, I've learned to love networking, having more conversations with other fractional CMOs or fractional CFOs, et cetera, just has really broadened my perspective. It's gotten me to the place where I know that there are people that I can reach out to if I need a certain solution, et cetera. And I don't know. I like it more today than I did before. So if you can learn to like it when you're younger, that would be great. And the last one I would say would be listen to your parents and invest in your 401k, max it out, and any other kind of tax beneficial investment assets. And I say that because you do that when you're younger. You can have a little bit more cushion and confidence if you want to pivot with your career. I never thought that I would start my own business, whether we're talking about Lucy Beauty, my e-commerce store, or with Brand Botany. So I think that if you have a little bit of cushion in your retirement, it gives you a little confidence to pivot and do something differently. And hey, maybe it's a couple of years that you do it, but you can do it, right? So that's the advice that I would give. I give it to the younger people in my family as well, my nieces and nephews, et cetera. So those are the three areas.
Very, very meaningful advice. All three of those points were great. Leslie, if people want to learn more about Brand Botany and what you're up to, where should they get in touch?
Sure. You can find me on my website, brandbotany.com. And you can just learn a little bit more about my background as well as my values as a marketer, as a leader. And then you can also find me on my social channels, for instance, LinkedIn or Instagram with the handle at Brand Botany, just, at Brand Botany. And then I also have a Substack newsletter where I talk about marketing for emerging brands. And that would be at brandbotany.substack.com.
Wonderful. I'm glad you jumped on Substack. It sounds like you have a lot of content that would be valuable there.
Yeah, I
Well,
love it.
Leslie, this was so awesome. Thank you so much for the time. And thank you for those who are listening through to the end. We'll have another episode again next week.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.